We often talk about hospitals, waiting lists and drug technologies within the NHS, but healthcare is ultimately delivered by people working under enormous pressure, often in emotionally demanding situations, whilst trying to also give safe, compassionate care. To explore this, we're delighted to be joined by Raffaela Goodby, Chief People Officer at Birmingham Women's and Children's Hospital. Raffaela has spent more than 2 decades in people leadership, culture and organisational development, with senior roles across Birmingham City Council, NHS England and Birmingham Women's and Children's Hospital. She has been recognised by the Chartered Institute of Personnel and Development as one of the world's top 30 HR leaders for her work on miscarriage leave reform and the Universal Family Programme, which has helped thousands of young care leavers into NHS careers. She's a passionate advocate for women's services. Today we'll be talking about what it means to look after the people who look after us. Welcome, Raffaela. It's lovely to have you here.
Thank you.
Could you start by telling us, Raffaela, where your interest in people and work and organisations began? Was there a moment early on when you thought, this is why the people role really matters?
I wouldn't say there's a defining moment. I've always been a people person. I did one of those questionnaires in sixth form to shape going to university where I studied psychology. And it came out as social worker or local government worker.
Okay.
So I think I ended up somewhere in between being a chief people officer in the NHS. And I wanted to work in the NHS because my mum's a nurse. She was a nurse for 50 years and she always says once a nurse, always a nurse. So I still get told off and told what to do by my mum on a regular basis. So she keeps me on the straight and narrow. I've always been interested in how people work. And in the work context, I think being a people person is often about being kind, thinking about the humans behind the faces or the job titles or the seniority. And that's carried me throughout my career, really. So I remain to this day, and I hope I always do, super interested in people.
I mean, that sounds really fundamental, surely, isn't it, to that kind of work? Is that across the board? Do most people who end up working in personnel and people services and HR have that sort of passion for people?
Well, I can't speak for everybody. And in the people profession in the NHS, it's really wide ranging and people covers HR, education, communications. There's all sorts of stuff, inclusion, diversity. It's a really broad portfolio, which is why I enjoy it so much. But I couldn't speak for everybody, but I think people who go into HR want to do well. They want others to do well. And some people are super processy and super attention to detail and sticking to a policy. So I think as a CPO, you're a range of all of that. Yep. I have days where I love the detail and then days where I want to be strategic and get out there and get out and about and see patients and see families. That's a really important part of working in the NHS.
Well, you were saying earlier that you were going to go and spend a day in theatres, weren't you? And that you've also spent a day doing endoscopies and all of that. And I mean, I suppose not only is that helpful for you to understand the day-to-day of kind of what kind of staff in the organisation do, but also it's probably really good for kind of colleagues in the organisation to understand that you care and know about their work as well.
Definitely. And those days are so much fun and I wish I could do it all the time. So I'm going to go to theatres. I'm doing a range of, I'm calling them back to the floor, but it's not back to the floor at all because the people who do...
you're up there somewhere.
Yeah, not at all. It's more going and celebrating and observing and learning about what people are doing. So I'm going to spend a day in theatres right from the brief, how the day's going to go, right through to the surgery, right through to hopefully seeing the patients in recovery, talking to their mums and dads. I'm really looking forward to that. And I'm also going to spend a day on delivery suite.
Ooh,
I'm hoping
exciting.
that I will get to make toast and tea for a new mum. I've been looking forward to that for ages.
That is the best tasting toast and tea
of your life.
Ever have, as a
you
woman
never
will ever
ever
have.
forget it, do you? How amazing it is when they're walking with the tea and toast and that first shower afterwards as well. It just feels like heaven. But I have done a series of observations before and I love seeing people in their different own context and where they shine and where they, especially in the Birmingham Children's Hospital and Women's Hospital, where they're interacting with parents, with the children, because people are completely different if they come to a meeting or in a kind of a formal corporate context than they are when they're dealing with families and with children. And it's just amazing. And also, I should do that. Senior leaders should understand what's going on. You wouldn't be the chief exec of Sainsbury's and not understand what the products are. So it's super important for senior leaders to go out and talk to people. But also you pick up, people will speak to you in a different way.
Yes.
They'll tell you things that are going on. Did you know this is going on in the organisation? Had you heard that this was happening? This team's struggling. Actually, here's the real life impact of financial cost reduction, or did you know that it's having this impact on patient care, or the parents are reacting in this way? So that's part of our role as a senior leader, to go and do that. And also it's really enjoyable to do that stuff. So hopefully it'll pick up cultural early warning signs by properly speaking to and listening and just being part of the different teams and the amazing teams right across the organisation. It's a privilege really to be able to do it.
You joined Birmingham Women's and Children's in October 2020 in the midst of COVID, and then you won an award for your contribution to your previous organisation's COVID response, which is amazing. But what did working during that really sort of challenging time period in the NHS teach you?
Well, so much. And I think collectively, and also me personally, I think it's taken a lot of time to process what went on during that time, especially as I think we've explored, is there going to be another pandemic? Is it going to go into lockdown again? I had that conversation with my teenager. She was really worried about the virus on the cruise ships recently, really worried about her summer ahead after her GCSEs. Am I not going to be able to see my friends? And there's a real trauma there, isn't there?
It's in such recent, vivid memories, especially for young people, isn't it?
And they don't know, they remember that as a really significant, couple of years of their life going into lockdown. And I think there is a collective processing that's going on in the NHS to the pandemic. But I think what was important, and the award, the HR Director of the Year award, was to do with the pandemic response, but it was more to do with loving leadership was a key part of that, but also the work we did around wellbeing during the pandemic, in particular for resident doctors as they're known now, junior doctors as they were then, and the work that we did with the consultant body and right across the organisation to make sure that we looked after staff looked after all of our colleagues during the pandemic. So we had wellbeing rooms, we had a wellbeing hub, we had spaces for the resident doctors to go to where there was food, because it wasn't necessarily easy to go and buy food and everything was closed. We had amazing support from the Sikh community, and loads of free meals dropped off that were langar, that were right across, like 1,000 meals a week they were dropping off for our staff, which was so welcomed and so amazing. And when I look back at the pandemic, and I even remember the first meeting with my team when we thought that we might be going into lockdown, what sustains people is trust, is relationships and honesty. And that's really tough, isn't it, to describe or to quantify? And I look back and I think I knew who to call on. And when you called on certain people, why don't we try doing X, Y or Z? All processes, etc., were off the table. So we didn't wait for national guidance for what can we do about shielding, what can we do about people who can't get to work or might live with immunosuppressed people at home. So we had some staff members living away from their family in a hotel, and we had to think, how can they still staff the intensive care unit when they've got immunosuppressed people at home? So they almost worked in 2-week cycles and often didn't see their family. So what did that mean for terms of the social impact of that? How were they still connected? How were we clear that we weren't losing anybody in the shielding scenario? So I think thinking about, we're all humans. So the human connection during the pandemic, how would I be feeling? How did it feel that my parents were shielding? How did it feel that my mum retired from nursing to look after my dad, who was shielding and never got to go back to work at that time? So all of those are very human reactions, aren't they? And you can't help but bring that human reaction to work because we're all humans. And I think part of and it was wonderful to get that award, and it was completely not deserved because it was on behalf of lots of different people. But having the space with your colleagues and with senior leaders to say, okay, let's look at this from a human perspective. Let's be heart-led about this. Let's think about what we would need as individuals, as daughters, as parents, as mums. And you have people who were thinking, how are my kids going to get to school? I haven't got anyone to look after them. You know, all of that. And I've taken that forward to my practice now, that heart-led practice, because it was so important and it was what got people through. And when I look back to the pandemic, I can remember the individuals, and you will never, the connections that were forged, I'm sure you felt the same in the NHS during that time, that can never be broken, can it? But I think that collective processing of that trauma, there's still a lot of that that's playing out, but still a lot of that collective processing to go.
And it does sound as though actually all the really fantastic stuff you as an organisation and as a team managed to achieve during that time was because you had invested in those relationships between each other before the crisis came, because without those, like you say, there wouldn't have been those trusted people to call upon. So it's kind of investing in those relationships all the time in preparation for the next crisis or pandemic, perhaps.
Absolutely. But there was also shining stars that came forward that I didn't know before the pandemic. And in the NHS, people are connected. So you know people who are in that organisation. And so it goes on. It's like mycelium, isn't it, underneath the surface? Everyone is connected, and it's kind of a community of people who know each other. And those connections are really important. So some people came forward during that time who I'd never met before, and they were amazing, incredible. And some of them were resident doctors who were on rotation for a year, but ended up being some of the stalwarts that I'm still in touch with now from the pandemic. So yes, investing in trusted relationships, but also being brave that when people come forward, you go, wow, okay, this is something different, and being open to that. And I think sometimes as senior leader, you think, oh, I need to have all the answers. And actually, none of us have got all the answers.
Especially not in that situation where nobody had any answers.
And even on a daily basis, people are, I think, no one's got all the answers to how we're going to fix the NHS, or how we're going to fix burnout in the NHS, or even in the 10-point plan. That's the 10-year plan. It's a really good indication of what might happen and what we need to do, but we don't know.
Yeah, how we're going to get there.
We don't. So I think humans together can do that. But I think people who say, I'm doing this, I'm doing that, I know what I'm doing, I've got to this. I just don't think that's true, because I think everyone has imposter syndrome about being in a scene.
There is that pressure, isn't there, to kind of look like you know what you're doing.
And then people don't say, before I came to work this morning, actually, my baby vomited on me before I got them to nursery. I had to change my clothes 2 times before getting here. I got here stressed out of my brain for a 9 a.m. meeting. And then people think that they should be perfect and they should be absolutely poised. But actually, part of bringing your whole self to work is saying, here's the morning that I've had, and actually, or here's the night that I had, and being human about that. And I think people respond to that, but that's not easy, especially as a woman.
Yeah, and as you get more senior in an organisation, that kind of idea of kind of embodying humility and vulnerability at the same time as holding a senior position within an organisation, or any position really within an organisation.
And I think that's tough, to be vulnerable and to be senior. And it's something I've been exploring in my own leadership journey recently, to try and be more vulnerable and talk about the amount of washing at home, you know, taking a day's annual leave to catch up on your housework, and actually talking about that rather than pretending that it's perfection. And that I've actually found that really empowering, because people respond to that rather than trying to think, oh, I'm a CPO, I'm this, I'm that. I'm not. I'm still a mom who's trying to run a house as well as be at work. And I think as senior leaders, we potentially should be a little bit more vulnerable, more
and
human.
model that kind of behaviour to everyone around us as well. Are there lessons from COVID that we're at risk of forgetting? We've talked about the amazing things that came out of it, but also the really difficult things as well that were going on. But sometimes it feels like it never happened. Sometimes I kind of go around my hospital and I'm like, did I dream that? Did that really happen? It was so weird. And the extremes of emotion attached to it. Is there stuff that we're at risk of not remembering about that time that was useful?
I think there is. And I think post-COVID, we were talking about COVID a bit more, weren't we? And we were talking about the lessons from the pandemic. And I think what we might be at risk of losing, and this is natural, is that, why don't we just do it? Like, what's the worst that can happen? And I remember we usually would wait for policy guidance or decisions from the national team, like whoever the national team are, the national team. We need to wait for the guidance. And you couldn't wait for the guidance because it was so super urgent. And what was really, really powerful in both my previous trust and at BWC and in Birmingham and Solihull was, rather than wait for guidance, we worked together with the trust around us. And there was amazing kind of goal command and lots of chief execs working 7 days a week chairing these meetings. It was incredible. And we would instead say, OK, let's make our own guidance. And there would be meetings twice a day or sometimes 3 times a day to manage the flow of patients, ambulances, you know, where there was intensive care beds. But also if we needed to develop a policy on something, and it might be, we ran out of scrubs. Remember, there was a real lack of PPE.
No scrubs,
and so we could identify that at the 8 a.m. goal command, and by 3 p.m. there'd be a solution. And so why don't we do that now?
Yeah, and like the NHS is famously so bureaucratic, isn't it? So that idea that suddenly if you blew that all away, there's all this creativity and action underneath
innovation
it.
As well. And I think we have lost some of that. But then also when you're in a highly regulated environment and there's been the inquiry, the COVID inquiry, and looking back and people saying, why did you take that decision? Why did you do that? And I think some of that, it would be fear. I would say fear, but not fear in a, I'm scared of that way, but fear that people have of, if I do that now, I might get into trouble.
Yes.
Or I would be breaking a rule and I'd get into trouble for that. I think there's a lot more of that, which can be helped by involving other people. Yeah. So if you do it 3 or 4 trusts together, then there's more power in doing it at the same time.
You're not this rogue individual or trust doing your own thing.
But I think we could do more of that. And I think where people are working really well together and they do have trusted relationships, there is a lot of that still going on, which I think was good learning from the pandemic. And also the way we looked after people in terms of their health and wellbeing during the pandemic, trying new things. We had, at San West Birmingham, we set up a wellbeing hub and there was like little massages in there. We did meditation. During the post-pandemic time, we were doing yoga sessions. So people say, you people are burnt out, do a yoga session. But those were really well attended, but they were a gateway, like a gateway drug to other things. And saying, OK, what's on offer? Remember the NHS had various apps about doing meditations or whatever. But it's not about meditations and yoga, but that having a conversation about your well-being and your well-being being critical to how you deliver on the day and how you look after a patient, that is important. And there's loads of evidence, isn't there? Professor Michael West is the one that comes to mind. If someone feels well at work, they feel highly engaged, they know who to speak to, they score high on morale, patient and mortality reduces.
I mean, that's really interesting because, you know, just from personal experience, you kind of see, and this is post-pandemic and everything, you see the yoga sessions, the mindfulness sessions, and you're just like, what is that for? But actually the idea of it being a gateway to kind of more formal access to support and help is really interesting. And maybe a way of catching those people who wouldn't directly go and speak to somebody. So
and I think we've moved on so much.
People joke about it. They don't. There's kind of memes.
It's good.
And stuff
at least they're talking
NHS
about
yoga
it
and stuff.
Yeah.
But
or if you're feeling burnt out, go on this webinar during your lunch break, which would be the only break that you have or some online yoga.
Yes.
So that is a joke, and it has become a meme, hasn't it? You get all sorts of stuff on Instagram, and I've just seen recently NHS Signs Instagram, which is just hilarious.
Oh, no.
Like
there's an NHS emails ones as well, isn't there? Which is really, but yeah, it's like how do we kind of access people who are just not going to otherwise seek help? And just going on to that, really, I mean, the NHS is one of wouldn't say the most emotionally demanding places to work, because a lot of places are emotionally demanding, but what are the biggest pressures that you see staff facing day to day?
So everything, every pressure from being a human and then being a human looking after other humans. And I think as well, when you're working in the NHS, there's almost an expectation that significantly traumatic environments won't impact you because, oh, well, that's your data, that's your job. But actually there is an impact of looking after poorly children or being in maternity services when you lose a baby or lose a mum, or even during the pandemic, all the people that were lost during the pandemic, there's an emotional toll. But there's almost a be brave about that. And that gives rise to a lot of hidden absences or hidden trauma, mental health issues, physical issues that people don't talk about necessarily. And I think we are so much better now, and this is from the pandemic as well, talking about this is the impact of X, Y, and Z on me. And I think we've got a duty, a moral duty, to listen to that. And to, if we don't have the duty to treat people as, for example, women and children, we wouldn't be responsible for the treatment part of mental health, but to making sure that we've signposted, make a really easy access, communicating what's available. And there's loads of stuff available, not just occupational health or, you know, go on to your employee assistance program that's open from 9 to 5. We've got lots of stuff available, including the Aria app that we recently launched, which is 24/7 support through for your mental wellbeing. You can speak with an AI generated, but it's by clinical psychologists that have generated that. That's going really successfully. But you could speak to that app any time of day or night, which is super important if you're on a night shift and something happens and it's 1 o'clock in the morning and actually you need somebody to talk to, and we wouldn't have our helplines available then. So there's all sorts of things that are available, but people also now, our employees have an expectation that those things will be available to them, but also that when they speak up, someone should listen. And I think we've got a moral duty to listen and to signpost people to the right support that they need, regardless of what that might be. So I think this stiff upper lip, which I can't even say, there's no room for that in 2026. I think we need to move on from that. Yeah,
and it's just that idea of having a range of touch points, which can be a gateway to kind of help really as and when people need it. So, and what's right for one person isn't going to be right for
not at all.
Somebody else.
And even if they see something either on a poster, a QR code, or in one of the internal emails or from a colleague, and then if they go onto the intranet and see something else, like, oh, I didn't realise they trusted that, or I didn't realise that it might even be an employee benefit or a salary sacrifice scheme or childcare vouchers, or I don't know, a salary sacrifice car. That's still a benefit for your financial well-being. And it's all there in one place. So even that little trigger that puts someone in that direction, they go, wow, there's absolutely loads of stuff here.
It's just pulling it all together, isn't it? And going back to kind of sort of staff sort of feeling that they have to do more and put on a stiff upper lip, how do you stop kind of going the extra mile, which is kind of what all of us working in the NHS feel that we have to do or should do? How do you stop it from becoming something that actually burns people out?
Well, if I had the exact answer to that question, I'd probably be a billionaire. I think there's a whole range of things. There's not one simple magic wand for that. And I think since the pandemic, the willingness to go the extra mile, and I don't mean this in a negative way, I think it's just a statement of fact, in some areas that has reduced.
Yes.
Because people did go the extra mile. Like, my goodness, we couldn't have got through the pandemic without NHS staff going the extra 100 miles, never mind one. And people do need to reflect on that and take some time. So there's a number of things. So people feeling fairly rewarded is really important. And fairly rewarded often doesn't mean getting paid more money. Yeah. It's one, am I fairly rewarded compared to this person who's doing the same job as me, especially in gender, that any gender differences. do I value the work that that person's doing, and I feel that I'm doing the same? So that can be fairly rewarded. We've seen, haven't we, recently, strikes, industrial action, which have just been agreed. If anyone's watching this podcast at a later date, that would give it some timing. But we have come through quite a long few years of industrial action, especially in the NHS. And going the extra mile could be, people often do that for their colleagues, and especially at BWC, they do it for patients. So if you've got to stay an extra half an hour to finish and to see someone on your list, and the parents have been waiting for that appointment or for that operation or for that surgery for 18 months, the staff do it and they're amazing. But if it's an expectation that you would do that, it's no longer the extra mile then, is it?
I mean, just moving on from that then, obviously, as the Chief People Officer of that includes a women's hospital, I wanted to talk to you about the recently sort of published Ockenden report about the devastating maternal and baby deaths in Nottingham University Hospital's NHS Trust. And that concluded that these took place due to deeply embedded system failures, which included a long-standing bullying and toxic culture, insufficient staffing, and the inability of staff to carry out basic and often mandatory training. You've been a massive advocate for women's health, and you're CPO of a women's hospital now. What have your initial reflections been on hearing about the conclusions of that report?
So when I first saw the report published last week and read the initial conclusions, first of all in the press, and then I read the full report in Nottingham. So my first response was utter compassion for and admiration for the women, the mothers, and the families who spoke up and took part in that, because that must have been reliving that for one. And it takes real bravery to do that, and to speak up about your lost baby, or your lost partner. And I was also reading through it and thinking that some of the issues that were in that report could be any organisation in the NHS in terms of lack of staffing that was reported. So we've really so in my current organisation, we've done really well on recruitment recently, but of course at the moment the NHS is facing significant financial challenges and, reductions of 5-6% in terms of financial turnover each year. And I looked at it and thought, oh my goodness, we need to make sure we get ahead of this, and that we, within especially the women's hospital, the busiest maternity unit in Europe, 8,000 births a year. We're a specialist hospital, one of only two women's hospitals in England, and we take that really seriously. So we're the only women and children's trust in the NHS, where you go right from women's health, having a baby, and then being into a child and right up to the age of 18. So we take that really, really seriously. And we discussed yesterday as a board, actually, for about an hour and a half, our response to the report, but also how we can make sure that we're not just being reflective and thinking about what's gone before, but that we're listening actively to women, to mothers, to families right now. What we've also been considering is the if you imagine 8,000 births per year, that's a lot of mothers who've given birth at our women's hospital, how they'll be feeling about that, and reflecting on they might have questions. How are we going to gear up and respond to that? Because even if you gave birth 20 years ago and something wasn't quite right, and you maybe had a question that you wish you'd have asked at the time and you didn't, you're going to read those reports, see it in the press, and that's going to trigger you. And we owe it to those women to make sure that we listen to them and respond to them. I was also thinking about the impact on our staff. So our staff who are today helping mums give birth, supporting dads and partners at the bedside, the midwives, the doctors, going into emergency surgery, doing C-sections, all of that comes with giving birth, how they'll be feeling reading that report, because they'll read those reports and think, oh my goodness, I could get into trouble. Yeah. Does that mean that what I do today is going to be more heavily scrutinised than what I did yesterday? Everyone makes mistakes at work, don't they? Everyone, it's a human thing. then they might be overthinking, I wish I'd have done that better. It happened to, because people do overthink things that happened. Is it going to be okay if I make an error? Will it be seen as a learning point, or am I going to get into loads of trouble and be in the press and be scrutinised for that? So the impact on our staff right now, we've also got to think about that and make sure we're supporting them with love and compassion as they process those news reports, because they're working in that environment right now.
I mean, when a trust or a service is under pressure, whether that's financial or resource pressure, what's the relationship between that and staff culture in your view?
Well, they're intrinsically linked, aren't they? And culture can be, so I don't think you have one culture for an organisation. So 6,000 people, or University Hospitals Birmingham, they've got 26,000 staff. So there's not one culture. A team might have a culture, a service might have a culture, an individual line manager might perpetuate a certain culture, be that positive or negative. So I think when staff are under pressure, that does affect the culture, but it might not be straight away, because cultures are developed over time, aren't they? And I think what we saw in the Nottingham report and in the whole Amos review is that culture, or a toxic culture, that is a combination of a whole host of things. But what's common, and you see this in private sector as well, the Enron crisis, for example, when that all happened, people were speaking up. So when it happened, there was a number of people who said, I've been trying to raise this, been trying to tell you for X, Y and Z years, and been trying to speak up, and either been silenced, or people didn't listen, or it wasn't the right kind of question to raise. And I think we're much better in the NHS at listening to people when they do speak up, more, especially recently. But people normally know. Well, they do know, don't they? No one's surprised. They're like, well, we knew that was happening.
So that's a repeated theme in a lot of the NHS scandals, isn't it?
But you see that in any scandal, or if you see things in the press, or if there's inquiries, and there might be years later, people say, but I could have told you that. I could have told you
that's
that.
Why I left. That's
why I left, or that line manager was doing whatever, and I tried to speak up, but actually there was repercussions, and I just thought it would be better for my health to leave, or better for my family to leave. So people are trying to speak up and tell us as senior leaders what's going on. And I think there's a key role for everybody in the NHS, every board, to, as part of a response to the Amos review and what's happened at Nottingham, to be really, really strict on ourselves and self-reflective. Are we listening? So could that happen? And I don't think anyone can say, no, that definitely wouldn't happen here. But for the grace of God, go all of us. And I think none of us can be complacent and say, but we're the top in whatever.
We would never be like that.
We would never be like that, because we don't know. And listening to the people who are speaking up is so important.
What does burnout look like in healthcare staff?
So burnout. So I think burnout in healthcare staff looks like when people have got to the end of their tether and they haven't got any coping strategies to do that. And it can happen to anybody. Anybody can burn out and kind of come to the end of the road on their own coping strategies. I think as an organisation level, it can look like not necessarily a spike in sickness absence, because often people are burnt out and still at work, but they are going
presenteeism type thing
and going through the motions. And often colleagues know about that. They notice there's you're not quite right, not your normal self. And that's where some of that teamwork that we talked about during the pandemic, and noticing, working as a team, knowing your team, looking out for each other, really comes in, to be able to identify that and signpost people to, did you know that there's this? Did you know that there's that? But often people will hide how they're feeling. And there's loads of reasons for that we know about.
So, Raffaela, you've done nationally recognised work around miscarriage leave and pregnancy loss. Why was that such an important issue for you?
So the work on miscarriage leave and on pregnancy loss came from a whole village of people who were passionate about this subject. And if I go back to 2021, one of my very good friends had a number of miscarriages, and she texted me one night to say, I've got to pretend that I've got something else wrong with me tomorrow, because my line manager told me that stop trying for a baby. Don't you think you should just focus on your career?
No.
So, and this was a woman who had said that to her. So she was saying, what can I write? What can I write to my line manager? She was asking me as a HR person around miscarriage leave. So that's not an unusual story.
Really?
It's really not. If you have a look at some of the Tommy's research, so when people have miscarriage or any kind of pregnancy loss, or even after pregnancy, a successful pregnancy, I think 46% of people, if they're not treated well, will want to leave their employer when they return to work. And there's significant impact on mental health, about perinatal mental health if you're treated really badly after during having a miscarriage, or even if you're treated well, there's a 40% increase in the likelihood of having mental health issues. So I was at the Women's Hospital about a year in, and Monzo had just gone live with their miscarriage leave policy, so up to 2 weeks off paid leave if any of their employees had a miscarriage. Channel 4 had just gone live with theirs. New Zealand had put into law, when the beautiful, who I fangirl over, Jacinda, they had 3 days that went into leave for their miscarriage leave. So at the Women's Hospital, spoke to the chief exec at the time and said, could we do this?
Did they not have anything at that time?
So nothing consistent. So there was inconsistent line manager discretion. So you would have bereavement leave, but it might be a period of sickness. So having a miscarriage it doesn't mean that you're sick. So I went to my chief exec at the time and said, why don't we, could we do this? And she was like, oh, I think so. So I kind of checked with our trade unions as well, whether they would be up for that. And of course, we've got the Royal College of Midwifery, one of our amazing trade unions. And our trade union person at the time was on the board of the Royal College of Midwifery. And so from the idea, and it wasn't just my idea, it came from friendship groups and from working at the Women's Hospital and seeing the amazing work that our midwives do. We've also got a partnership with Tommy's, who are a miscarriage charity. So we got the leave and the policy agreed within 6 weeks.
I'm just sort of staggered to hear that this isn't a standard thing across the NHS, or wasn't a standard thing.
No, it wasn't. It wasn't a
standard thing. How can that even be? That just seems bizarre.
But you as a human being and as a mental health professional, you would think that it was a standard thing, but it was really inconsistent. We had stories of, and this is a trigger warning for anyone listening, about miscarriage and about pregnancy loss. We had stories of people who were having a miscarriage in the toilet and then carrying on and delivering someone else's baby, people who went into a cupboard on an NHS corridor and then carried on with their shift because they didn't want to tell anyone that they were pregnant because they were pre-12 weeks. Because there's a stigma, isn't there, to telling your employer that you're pregnant or in early pregnancy or trying for a baby. There's a whole stigma to, are they going to think I'm not dedicated? Do they not think that I want to be here? So there's a whole... And there's loads of research around this. If anyone who's listening wants to have a look, Tommy's or the Miscarriage Association are a really good place to start. So at that time, we're the only one of 2 women's hospitals. And of course, we should be, and I said to the chief exec at the time, who was amazing, and our trade unions, if not us and now, then who's going to do it and when? Because we're perfectly placed to do this and then to advocate with other NHS trusts.
So no other NHS trusts were doing this
Some
either?
people were doing it informally and not calling it miscarriage leave formally. And I'm sure there are amazing people across the NHS, amazing line managers, take all the time you need, really supportive people where it's really good leaders, really good line managers. And we heard loads of stories like that. But then we also heard stories like my wife had a miscarriage 20 years ago. She had to go straight back to work. I've never forgot it.
Really idiosyncratic kind of responses to this.
Really old-fashioned, horrible responses, to be honest. And people don't ever forget that, do they? And it obviously has an impact for the longer term. So that was in 10th of July 2021. And then from there, it kind of took off, really. And we advocated as a trust. Lots of other people, everyone locally adopted it. And then lots of other NHS trusts adopted the policy. So that was 10 days paid leave for mums or birthing people, and we did 5 days paid leave for partners. Some other trusts did 10 and 10. So you would negotiate with your local trade unions and then see how the policy came out. So, and then NHS England were really interested in developing a model policy as part of their policy framework, that rather than have 300 NHS trusts and organisations develop their own policy, but they were doing that for lots of different HR policies, right, and save loads of time. The team there were absolutely amazing.
So you got it on their agenda, basically.
Got it on there, and then I offered to chair their working group as well to get this through. But
I'm going to start fangirling after you now.
It makes it sound like it was my work, and it wasn't. It was a whole team of people who were really passionate about it, and they've gone on and done brilliant other policies. The Sexual Safety Charter is another model policy that they did. A recruitment policy, the menopause policy was another model policy that they implemented. So really amazing stuff, and saves tons of time for NHS HR professionals. So they took up the mantle, developed a national policy in partnership with other key stakeholders, with the research experts into miscarriage, Tommy's Miscarriage Association. And then on the 13th of March 2024, that went live to everyone in the NHS. So that's paid leave for anyone who works in the NHS, 10 days for the birthing, for the mother, or birthing person, and then 5 days, up to 5 days paid leave for partners. So there's loads of stuff online. And again, trigger warning, because some of the videos are really emotional, especially with partners, what it means to them, being able to drop everything and go and support their partner. So your partner doesn't have to work in the NHS, as in... So you would get the leave if you work in the NHS, but if your wife or girlfriend or partner worked in a different organisation and was having a miscarriage, then you would still get the leave to support them.
You've also worked on the Universal Family Programme, which is about supporting care leavers to go into NHS careers. Where did that come from?
So the Universal Family Programme is we signed the Care Leaver Covenant as BWC, which any organisation can sign. So Amazon have signed that. Channel 4 again are on there. There's all sorts of gyms on there, banks. There's loads of people. Have a look at, I think it's carecovenant.org.uk, and your organisation might want to sign up to that as well. And you commit to supporting people who are leaving care, young people. So you get chucked out of the care system when you're 18, and often people go straight from being in foster care to going to a homeless shelter, like St Basil's, for example. So we've heard stories of St Basil's, who are one of our key partners, where as soon as you don't get paid to be in foster care when you're 18, on their 18th birthday, they're dropped at the door of St Basil's by the foster carers. Yeah, because they don't get paid for them anymore.
God, so what kind of message does that give a young person? It's just awful, isn't it?
It gives them that they're not wanted, and that they're not valued.
And that they were never really wanted.
And some of these kids have maybe been in 20, 30 foster care placements over their lives and not really knowing what's going on. So, of course, that's going to mean that you live a different life and more insecure life than a child who's grown up in one family and one household. So the Care Leaver Covenant is to support care leavers. 10 to 12,000 young people leave care every year. That's right across, that's England only. In Birmingham and Solihull, that's can be about 1,500 young people in our surrounding area. So we committed to, through signing the Care Leaver Covenant, support those young people. So that could be with work experience opportunities, mentoring. For example, the banks, even if you were in a homeless shelter, or if you were living at St Basil's, often if you're homeless, you can't get a bank account. So HSBC offer bank accounts even if you're homeless, so that you can get benefits and have stability and, all of that. And DWP, there's amazing people who are part of it. And then, so we signed up as Birmingham Women's and Children's to support the Care Leaver Covenant. And we've got amazing young people who've come to work for us. They are incredible. And they need extra care and attention because might not have been in the workplace before, not had to... no one has been strict with them to say, you've got to be at work at this time, here's what you've got to wear, you can't be on your phone all day. And it feels very similar to when apprenticeships started to be more popular, and line managers going, I'm not going to have an apprentice. They're just going to mess about. That's too much hard work. I don't fancy that. You've almost got to be a corporate parent to, I think about my kids, they didn't stop needing me as a mom when they became teenagers and when they became past 18, they still need you, but in a different way, need guidance and access to trusted people. And then again, NHS England again took up, a number of NHS trusts signed the Care Leaver Covenant, doing amazing things, amazing partnerships with football clubs, with different charities, with local community groups. This is where local and community really works well on when it's scaled up. And NHS England then signed the Care Leaver Covenant on behalf of the NHS. We did the big signing of on something that was on a flip chart. It was signed by the Chief People Officer of the NHS at the time, really high profile. And what that meant was they put aside funding for ICBs, Integrated Care Boards, to employ 25 care leavers per ICB. We had 10 pathfinders in the first year. We did toolkits, we did all sorts of stuff, and then that was rolled out to all the rest of the 32 ICBs at that time. So the whole NHS then had a structured approach to employing care leavers. So there was 900 jobs for care leavers, 1,400, no more than that, sorry, over 3,000 interactions with care leavers. So even if there's not a job at the end of it for that person, they might have gone into education, into work experience, into a placement. And now the Civil Service and Department for Health and Social Care, they're about to go out with a supported placement and internship. So it's still carrying on. So we called it Universal Family because the idea is that you are like Auntie Raffaela or auntie or uncle to that young person, because you can't just go, oh, we're going to tick the box and employ a care leaver. You've got to look after them. You've got to invest
that time and care into,
because they've already had adults let them down their whole lives. So, but we've got James is like our James Stokes. You Google him. He's on like BBC News. He went to Number 10. He met Larry the cat. So he works for us in the health and wellbeing team. Actually, you might have met him on some of the stuff that we do. Amazing guy. He won Learner of the Year at HPMA last year, and to see him come on from when we first worked with him three or 4 years ago to what he's doing now, like he's a member of our team and our family. I'll make sure I send him a birthday card and whatever, because having a trusted person or trusted people, and our line managers have really looked after people. We had a young person who came and he worked in IT. He'd been in like 30 different foster homes, and he was referred in by James because James knew that it would be okay. And everyone talks, don't they? Young people, especially on social media, it goes around a WhatsApp group in about 5 seconds. So if the Universal Family Programme was about being an NHS family that was welcoming and loving to these young people, but in a very structured way, and that national programme was very structured in what it offered to those young people.
Just moving on to sort of a couple of final questions, Raffaela. If you could change one thing about how we support NHS staff sort of nationally, what would that be?
Oh, so if I had a magic wand, I think the being heart-led and treating each other with love and equality. And I don't mean that in a hippie inclusion way. I mean it in a oneness way. I went to Nishcom recently and met the amazing sponsor of Nishcom. And I said to him, if you had one message to NHS staff, the 1.6 million people who work in the NHS, what would it be? And he kind of thought about it and went quite quiet, and I literally thought, the starlight around you, he's got that aura. And he said, we are all one, and if people realise that we're all one, we're all humans, I'm not better than you because I've got a more senior job title or a fancy job, whatever, we're all one. And if we all realise that and treated each other like that, how powerful would that be? And it's actually really easy to treat someone as, I'm a human, you're a human, we're one, we're part of global humanity. How powerful would that be? So I'm going to use his response rather than mine, but that really struck me. I've been thinking about it since, and the way he delivered it as well, he literally had sparkles around his head.
We all need sparkles around.
We all need sparkles.
Thank you, Raffaela. Thank you so much for coming and sharing these amazing insights with us.